a nine in a club. Hi, everybody. It's Nancy with For Your Canine.
And Joanne with For Better For Worse.
And Lisa with K9 Defined.
Today our topic is going to be a little different. Our guest speaker is got the flu, so while even though she's home, I think it would be best for her to feel a little bit better before we pelt you with a bunch of questions. So we're going to talk about today about proofing dog behavior, and it's just a topic that it's been near and dear to my heart because that's what I'm working on with my puppy, with some of the basic stuff, because he is still a puppy. So, how to proof behaviors and how to know if your dog really understands what you're asking him. Does he understand does he really understand sit? Does he really understand down? Does he really understand loose leash walking? So today we're going to talk a little bit about that. And just kind of some ways and some steps to hopefully help you, um, you know, uh, figure it out or be able to design your training program to be able to incorporate that somewhat. So let us know you're out there. Um, so today, so we're going to talk about proofing behaviors, and we're going to start with real basic stuff. And it's a little we're going to try not to be sciencey because this is where it does get a little bit like, oh, this is uh, where the science comes in. But there is, I think dog training is science and art. I think it's a combination of the two things. It's not only science because it's not everybody's cut by that mold, but it's not only an art form either, where it's just willy nilly. There are some rules to getting behaviors, keeping behaviors, and proofing behaviors, based on science. So today we're just going to talk about proofing, and we're going to talk a little bit about dog sports and proofing as well, because I think that's where I think we fall down a little bit on. Um, in dog training, like a dog, can your dog sit while he's at home? Can he sit in the yard? Can he sit out in the front of the house? Can he sit at the store? All those things, and those are things most people do on a regular. I don't think they do it with a lot of deliberateness. They just happen to be doing it, and the dogs just happen to learn it because dogs are really good like that. So, don't you agree? I mean, I don't know too many pet owners that really are like, well, I want him, that are very deliberate in where they're training the dog.
Yeah, I don't think people think about it, right? It's like if I trained you at home in the living room, why don't you understand it out in public, right? I think there's just a different viewpoint in all of it for beginning people who just have pets. I don't think the thought comes into their minds. And then for dog sporting people, I think we forget. Sometimes we go so long between the last time we trained a dog at something, we forget how long it took with our first dog to actually go, oh, yeah, when I put you in front of a jump, you don't actually know what stay means.
Right. Yes, right. Right. Absolutely. And that's true, because especially, and depending on what sports you're doing too, right? Can they do it when there's all this going on? So I told, and we had a puppy social the other day, and a lot of people, oh, well, my puppy does it really good at home, and I go, good, because he should. I said puppy classes are really, really designed for the dog to be able to work around other dogs. I mean, it's not like teaching them this stuff is pretty easy. It's not that hard, and most of us can do it at home easily. The problem is they have to be able to do it in a different environment with the different dogs and in a more public setting. So you could see how that becomes a bigger issue, right? And so people are training their young puppies at home, and they don't get out into the world until they're much older, which then presents a bigger problem.
I think too, like it depends, right? Like what people want. Like you said, I mean, like everybody has their own motives and goals. And I think that like lots of times, well, they do it great at home, which we've all heard. And then the next thing is like, well, what do you want them to do when they're in this situation? Like, and I think people have a hard time forward thinking because, oh, they know it, but it's not the same. It's like book smart versus street smart, right? Like I know what you expect of me, but then I don't know how to take it from a situational point. And I think that's something that that not enough people stress upon. And then they get people, and I find people do get frustrated. Well, they do it at home, and then they get frustrated with their dog. I'm like, but it's not fair because you haven't necessarily taken it on the road. And it's just, it's just something that they don't really take into consideration.
Mhm.
So,
Well, and to be fair, and I think you all can agree, and Lisa more so, um, because people don't really want to spend the time to train their dogs. They would rather drop it off or have somebody else do it. And unfortunately, you can get some training in that way, but you're not going to get everything you need depending on what your goals are, right?
Well, and I don't know about you guys. You guys all teach basic classes, so it's like for me, the biggest one is leash training, right? So well, my dog walks great in here, and so right, it's like as soon as they walk in the room, there's an expectation of there's cookies. You're expected to be connected, right? And so I think that's one of the opposite ones, right? Where we go into the training room and they walk lovely on a leash, right? And then we go into the real world and it falls apart. So
Yeah.
again, it's just contextual. Doesn't always have to be home versus somewhere. Yeah.
And then it's right. It's in the in-betweens. Most people are rushing to class, so then they
Right.
lose that piece from point A, which is from the car, to the point of getting in. It's like either management or train it, but you can't expect it if you're not actually trying to work it in some fashion.
Mhm.
So,
Right.
and you're right. And like people go to have the dogs establish behaviors, but a lot of it, as you know, it has more to do with the fact that it's the dog. Dogs know who means what. Like they
Yeah.
know who's serious and who's not.
Oh my God.
Additionally, another point of that has to do with the fact that when we're training, I can't tell you how many people that wear treat bags and the dogs are like, oh yeah, okay, undivided attention. We're together. What are we doing? Right. And I think there's also a way to segue away from trying to change the look of training and working with dogs in that environment versus, and then trying to apply it to real world.
Mhm. Well, and I can tell you, I'm living it right now. Between myself and my husband can totally teach a dog how to ignore him because we're just talking about that today. He's calling the puppy. He's just calling the puppy, and the puppy's like, "Meh." He's not gonna back it up. He already knows, and he's only 5 months old. He knows that he ain't gonna do anything about it. So he already knows he doesn't really have to listen, which is really annoying, right? Because he at this young age, he's already learned, and all my dogs, unfortunately, that's how it is. They don't listen to my husband. They don't, because what he's gonna do, he's just gonna whine and nag them, and they're like, I can handle that. It doesn't bother me at all. Where with for me, I'm gonna come down and get you, and there's gonna be consequences to that for that behavior. So yeah, it's so fascinating how quickly they figure that out, because my very young puppy is like, yeah, you're not gonna do anything, so it's all good.
Yeah, you definitely have to like mean it and say it and then have management in place, right? Because there's training and then there's management. And when you're proofing, you still have to have a management plan in place just in case.
Right.
And I think that's something that's missing too. Like we don't,
like at our facility, when people come to it, like you said earlier, they're just coming into class, so they're just letting the dog drag them in there. So and then we have the opposite. We have some people are trying to train it, but it's hard to train it in that environment when there's so much going on. Right. So it's just easier to put some management in, lure the dog all the way into the room, and then maybe on the way out, when the dog's a little more tired, you might be able to be a little bit more successful more successful on that. But yeah, it was so funny, Kathleen, you mentioned Mirror the hubby. Oh yeah, it's in my house, it is night and day for sure. So which is concerning, because I always worry about if they get away, they're not going to listen to him, because he's taught them not to listen. So
I think it's interesting. One, I think a couple other factors to consider is, one, how many people are in the home, because the more people you have, the more variables you have, right? Because I'm sure Joanne, living by herself, doesn't have the same kinds of experience that we have, because she follows through every single time. Whereas most people have multiple people involved, spouse, family, what have you, available, and the dogs are not. They're like, we know this person means it, this person doesn't. So, you know, it's just playing the odds, just like most kids do. And then also, like in my house, like I'm, you know, you have to get up off the couch and make that stop. Like you can't just yell, you
Oh
can't
my
be on the couch, right? You have to be like, knock it off. And I'm like, get up and do something,
That's my
because
husband.
it's not going to
Like,
change.
I don't want to get up from here. I just want to make it stop from over here.
Right.
Like, it doesn't work like that. Especially when you have a young we have two young, really young dogs. My
Mhm.
beagle's a little over a year, and the puppy's 5 months. Yeah, they're not going to stop it. You have to interrupt it sometimes.
Right.
Where the two bigger dogs, yeah, you could just say, "Hey, knock it off." They're like, "Okay," and that's it.
But there is an age difference too, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
when you actually are working a young dog, it's a different story in terms of your training path, right? So like, and I'm super careful, and I love my husband to death, but I'm not going to leave him with impressionable youngins, including my Papillon,
Well,
right?
yeah, that's why you had your puppy.
So yeah, but I'm like, yeah, and so, and the thing is crazy. Like as trainers, we understand that, and we create such value in responding to us that are like, I go upstairs, and my Riff is like at the stairs, and he's like, where did she go? The fun cannot begin until she comes back. And I'm like, that's correct, right? So building that value and that relationship, I think, is critical. And I think sometimes we forget that piece, because, you know, you have to be the giver of good things, and you have to be the one to be like, hey, good stuff happens when you listen it. And I think that that's something that's missing. I mean, or at least not, we don't consider it. Like when we're in the thick of things, we don't consider that.
Right.
So
yeah, well, like right now, I have a 5-year-old that's really annoying. Anyway, so somebody needs attention or something, because he's gonna get it if he doesn't stop. Anyway, so that's one of the things we wanted to talk a little bit about, proofing. And Joanne, I'm so glad Joanne brought up about the agility jump, because my puppy still doesn't know stay very well. So obviously we're not, and we're starting to learn agility more than some of the other stuff. And so it's so interesting how well he doesn't even know stay, just to be a little bit away. So we're still in progress, right, with that particular skill set, right? But how to proof it in different places and take them elsewhere, because again, being at home is very, very different than being out in the world. There's so much other stuff, and there's also at home it's more structured. It's more safe for them. They don't worry about too much. When they're going out in the world, it becomes a little bit more concerning in some dogs' case, right? So I did a really short, little bitty, nothing slideshow to kind of go over some of the things you want to think about when you're working it. And Joanne and Lisa can jump in. So first of all, you have to have the behavior, right? The dog understands sit. The dog understands what it is, and the dog's fluent, that it really understands it, right? Because you can't proof a behavior your dog's still not sure about. So, so the one first you want to know, if you tell your dog, and we're going to use sit because it's easy. When you tell the dog sit, does it sit right away, or does it look at you like, I don't know, right? And he doesn't offer the behavior what being cued. Well, I have to tell you, my puppy will offer sit because it's been so heavily reinforced. But I'm okay with that. So, and I don't always reinforce it. I just tell him what a good boy he is until I ask him for it. And then, and he doesn't give you anything else. Like if you say sit and he lies down, which we'll talk about that a little bit, because some people teach a dog to sit to down from a sit, and sometimes it gets a little blurry what the behavior really is. And so that's something you have to look at, because that's right, Lisa, that we used to see that more often. So that's why we try not to teach a sit down from a sit, because
and what I used to get caught up in is I do a default down. So instead of offering a sit, I'm like, I'd rather my dog's down because it's easier for me to see them get up and move. You know what I mean? Because I'm, that way. But I also see that, like, if you offer a sit, what you reinforce more, you're going to get paid more of, right? So, and so for you do a lot more sits. I do a lot more downs. Do you have a preference for yours? Do you teach one more than the other?
I always teach sit first, but no, I mix them up. So, I mean, I'll ask for whichever one.
And I ask for them, but then if I see my dog struggle, then I have to pay for it, right? Pay for the one I want. But yeah, we'll get into that piece, of course.
Right.
So, and so the other piece I did not put in here is what's your criteria, which I know we did a whole Facebook Live on that, you guys. So your criteria is, what should your sit look like? That's important. How, and I know that sounds crazy. Like, what do you mean? A sit is a sit? No, because my shepherd, when he was a puppy, and my puppy now, my lab puppy, if he's sitting with that kind of, what do you call it? A puppy sit? Like,
like
yeah,
leg out and slouchy.
I don't pay for those. I only pay for the, tucked in, sitting straight. I don't pay for that puppy sit. I don't pay for that. So that's my criteria. I want a nice straight sit, right? And a lot of it could be for him. He's still growing and developing, so that might be. So if he doesn't give me that behavior, really, if he's not comfortable, I might ask it once, get a good sit, and then that's it. And I won't keep asking him, because he still might be physically not able to feel comfortable in that, right? So you have to have your criteria and how fast, right? And I'm gonna kind of touch upon it, and you guys can jump in. It depends on the breed, right? A Newfie is not going to sit as fast as a little bitty Chihuahua, so you got to consider that, right? A Newfie, you tell him to sit, by the time he gets comfortable and gets in position to go sit, it might be a little slower than the sitting for the, for some of the other faster, more agile breeds. So something to consider, because speed is a thing to think about, right? Anything else you guys can think of that would say your dog is fluent?
I think too, like the way you've taught sit, like some people teach a sit where they take the cookie and they go up and back, so the dog does a rock back sit. And so I guess it's something to consider, like, is that okay with you or not? I prefer a little more form and function in terms of the sit. I'd like for a tuck sit, so I'd like to pull the cookie up and have their butt scooch in, so it's more of a tuck sit. And I think that makes a difference. Like for example, my border collie, the breeder really worked on proper sits, and when she had a little designated target for his front paws, and he always does a tuck sit. But I think that has a lot to do with how you initially train a behavior. Going back and fixing it is a whole nother story, of course.
Right. And so, definitely thinking about what your criteria is, and how quickly you want them to, and how consistent they're giving you the behavior. And again, we're using sit as a basic, but we're talking about any behavior, right? We're talking about for any sport, because now I'm teaching dog agility. Like I'm teaching my puppy to come to side on my right side because I'm wanting to do agility. It took him a minute to get that, right? He didn't get that right away. And I wouldn't say he's, at 80%, he's still working on it. But again, he's still young, and we have work to do. So would I say he's fluent in that? No, he's not, right? We're still working on the fluency. So I wouldn't add any distractors in that situation because he's still not doing it.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add here, just because I know we have a lot of people watching of different, when we talk about fluency, this is just asking if your dog is fluent in a behavior. So if they do have those straight sits, or they have a nice sphinxy down, and all of a sudden, and they've had it for years, and all of a sudden you don't see that, a lot of times that's not your dog losing fluency, right? That's musculature, that's pain, that's being uncomfortable. And so, as Nancy said in the first, I'm not going to pay my dog for that. Well, as my dog becomes middle-aged or senior, that might be the sit that they're comfortable with. And I might, okay, can you stop just for a minute? So that might be, what I end up paying my dog for. I'm still going to ask for straight things, but understand if they really knew it and they did it right all the time and it changes, that's not the dog being lazy.
Right.
Well, I will tell you a perfect example and that I remember is my dog Lacey, who is a red and white Aussie, and she loved healing. She loved obedience. And then I started noticing when I put her in a sit stay, she started sliding into a down. And then I sought help to try to figure out, why is this happening? What am I not doing properly? It turned out she had stenosis.
Mm-hmm.
And so then she was like, I can't sit for very long. So then at first I was like, and everyone's like, well, do this, do that, do this, do that. And then finally I looked at her and I found that out and I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. And I'm not going to push it. So.
Right. And with the puppy, he's still developing, right? So that's why I said sometimes when he's in a good place in his development, he sits very nicely, and that's fine. And then there's other times he's like, I really can't give you a good straight sit. I go, okay, so we'll get one good straight sit, and then we're done, because he's clearly still in that development piece, and he's maybe tomorrow or the next day or next week it'll be easier for him.
And then Deb Plowman talked about Bassets. That's another consideration, right? Breeds. I have to say, because like I have my Papillon and he's 6 months old and he's like, I can sit. And I'm like, how about a down? I can't. That's way too hard. And I'm like, but my herding breeds did it. Like they had all these behaviors by 6 months, right?
Right.
So your working breeds are different versus the other dogs that are bred to be a bit more independent. And you have to remember developmentally, it's just different.
Right. So you got to remember when you're working and proofing that, if you have a young dog or an older dog, as Joanne said, you got to consider that, right? All right. And then how to start. So this is basically that your dog is fluent in that behavior, whatever behavior, right? So let's say loose leash walking. Your dog is a phenomenal loose leash walker up and down your block when there's no dogs, and in a quiet park, he can rock it out and do it real well. So then he understands what that means. And when you say, let's go, he can kind of walk nicely near you, and he's doing that really, really well. And then, so then you would start to proof it. And you're going to proof these three things, right? The duration, how long your dog can do it, which again goes back to a sit stay. I'm not going to a long sit. I'm not going to ask my 5-month-old puppy to sit for 20 seconds or 30 seconds. He's not going to be able to do that he could maybe once or twice, but it's not going to be. I'm not going to be able to do that. Distance, can I get further away from him? Yeah, I can start incorporating that a little bit, right? Again, maybe not 6 feet yet, maybe only 3 or 4 feet. He can handle that, right? And then this is the distraction part. Can he do it in a room full of dogs? Right? Chances are right now, no. but that's something to work towards. And whenever you change one or you're working on one, you have to adjust the other one. You can't try to do all of it at the same time. So if you're going to increase distance, then you probably shouldn't have a ton of distractors around, right? If you're going to try to increase distance, or if you're going to add a distraction, then you definitely want to stay a little closer. You don't want to be as far. Until you have those behaviors, then you're able to then put them together. So it's really important that you do one thing at a time. And just because you were able to at one time at PetSmart, you were able to get a good distance, doesn't mean that you're going to go to the park and be able to do the same thing, right? It's a big difference there. Also, when you're changing any one of these, you should probably your reinforcement has to be worth it too, right? If you're going to ask him to do a sit while another dog is present, you better make sure it's going to be worth it for him to do that. Or it doesn't have to be could be treat, but it could be a toy or whatever, right? Something else.
Today we were working. There was I did a workshop and stuff, and there was a dog there who was highly food motivated, but very social, very interested in engaging with a person. So we worked on attention and focus, and then working on duration of behavior at a distance where I was further away, the distraction was further away. And then I came in and I was talking to the dog. But it was once the dog had established and said, okay, I get this. And, oh, she's over there, but what are we doing? And able to split attention fluidly with emotion, right? Because if it's fast and furious, then you're talking about arousal and you're not ready quite yet to start proofing or making things a little more challenging. So in this case, we ended up reinforcing, and then slowing down the reinforcement. I stepped closer, and then she's like, she's there, but I'm with you. Who cares? And then finally I got an ear twitch. And then I started increasing, like talking to her, oh, what a good puppy. And that usually, in the whole leaning in and looking at him, always makes it more challenging, right? Because then the dog is like, whoa. And then you notice the motions and so forth. But she did pretty good. And I think that's kind of a, another example would be a stay, right? Like Nancy had said, first I have you sit, stay, and I'll feed you for holding stay. I'll stop feeding and then I'll release you. Then the next time I'm going to work a little duration where I'll feed you, but my rate of reinforcement isn't that quick, right? And then I stop and I release you. And I think the other part when you're proofing is, like you said, the rate of reinforcement is critical. As the dog starts, you increase your criteria, then they start to say, oh, we're here now. And if the dog ends up having a challenge or the behavior breaks down, you step back and rework it from here again too, right? So I think there's a lot of considerations with the proofing. And I think the hard part about proofing is being able to read the dog to determine if it's too much or not.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's one of those things you definitely want to be able to to get that duration and vary the different. I have a cold, you guys, too, so, or allergies, something. Anyway, but yeah, you want the dog to be able to and some of the criteria are making it more challenging is, like Lisa said, something slight, like a little lean, eye contact. For some dogs, that's all it takes, right? And you want that fluency and the rate of reinforcement. You have to let the dog make the decision, right? Because sometimes we're just feeding so much that the dog doesn't get a chance to make a decision. You have to give the dog a chance to make a decision, right or wrong, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And as Lisa was talking about, reading the dog. Sorry guys, so we're having a blast over here. So like as Lisa was talking about, I always do like the rule of twos, right? I'm not going to give you a third chance to mess up. Okay. So if I'm trying something new, let's say it's a stay or a sit that I'm walking away from or something, Roscoe. And they break and they break it again, right? I'm not going to try it again a third time because it's clearly not going well. So I have to shift down one of these pieces here, right? Duration, distance, or distraction to make it easier for the dog. They're telling me I can't handle whatever it is that you're doing, right? So that's not a place that I would correct my dog. That's a place that I'm going to say, okay, whatever I'm doing, the dog is not going to be successful at. So how can I help them?
Right. And then you would change one of those. You would get a little closer. You would not have that distraction there or whatever it is, right? You would adjust something and then go back and try it again. And here's the other thing. It's like the training sessions, and this I always tell my puppy people this, or people, and your training sessions do not need to be very long at all, right? Short is better. Something that your dog, you can go in there and do a couple of minutes and have a nice, successful, good, strong training. Just because you can have an hour of really crappy training and you get nothing, or you can have 5 minutes of super great training, and woohoo, you're in good shape, right? You had 5 minutes of really good quality training. So it's a quality over quantity for sure. All right. And then the next one is, so here's what you want. And this is per Bob Bailey. And I don't know who, Bob Bailey is a trainer, an animal trainer for the military. He's much older now. And they have where they develop the criteria and the scientific method for training dogs that we use today, and we also and he's still doing it. It's a little different now with dogs because the animals he trained were like dolphins and all these other things, trying to do wonderful things, but dogs don't live. It's not the same relationship, so that's why science is important. But then Dog training is also an art form as well. So you want to have the behavior to be 80% between introducing a new distraction. And that is 100%. So for example, if you're able to get 10 feet away from that sit, and you get it 80% of the time, so that means out of 10 times, 8 times he was successful, then you can maybe add a stuffed toy that's at a distance or something like that. So that's kind of how you start putting things together, right? If you're able to when before you add a new distraction. If you, like Joanne said, if you've done it twice and 2 times it didn't come out, maybe you had it one time that was successful, the other time wasn't, you still want to make sure you get a little bit more that the dog really understands what you're asking. It's really important. And if you, like she said, if you put a distractor and the dog clearly tells you can't handle it, then back to square one, which means you might have to get a little closer. You might have to get a little closer. You might have to maybe the distractor needs to be a little less distracting. Any of the above. You want to be able to change something to make the dog successful.
You could try a squeaker for a distraction.
That's a good distraction.
Yeah, he goes, I'm gonna. And we just talked about it. When you're proofing a behavior, change only one variable at a time. So, for example, variables are where you are and what you're asking. So, say, for example, you're gonna try a stay at a dog training facility. Awesome. And the dog's successful. But then you're gonna go to where there's a dog park and a whole bunch of people and a big festival. Well, that's a lot of different variables to ask them to do that behavior in, right? You want to really think about what you're changing and how you're changing it, right? And how long you're asking him to be in that, right? How long are you asking him to be able to do that behavior in that environment? So you might really want to look at how you're going to change it. So that's really important. Because I think we tend to be pushers. People tend to be, they like to push it, and then that's when it doesn't go well because then the dogs can't, and then you get mad at the dog and so on and so forth. So, those are just little notes that I thought would be good to have, because I think we tend to want to lump them and lump behaviors, and I can speak for myself. I used to be quite a lumper. and then just know, while you might, especially as your puppies are growing and developing, you might have a really great training session one week, the next week might be terrible, and it's just part of the gig, right? It's just how it rolls, and you'll just have to maybe take a pause and then try it again a day or two later, because maybe at that time they're not quite ready to learn that. And that doesn't mean they're dumb or anything like that. It just means that in this moment in time, they're not really ready to take it, to understand that particular situation or that particular problem. Lisa Beckman.
Yeah, this is a different.
Yeah.
That needs to be handled differently. That dog's not ready for proofing.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right. So if you watched the one from last week, 2 weeks ago, that's one of those situations you need to talk to a trainer. That's probably not something you should handle by yourself. So
right.
I don't know where you're located, but
yes, it sounds like if she has to be muzzled,
You're over threshold.
And she doesn't want to, yeah, that means it's not proofing. She's not feeling safe. And it sounds like that's a whole nother, we're talking specific to training behaviors, right? Southern Illinois. Who's down there? Well, Joanne might be the closest.
Southern? Yeah.
Well, ish. Because Joanne's in Rock Island, so it might be still a couple hours for you, but
yeah, we're in that's technically Northern Illinois. Southern Illinois is probably Carbondale-ish. I don't know.
Yeah.
You can reach out to one of us at our email addresses. So
yeah, and then we can maybe
find someone.
Yeah.
I don't know, our pig email list. Yeah. Probably just reach out to one of us and then we can help see if there's somebody in the area that might be able to help you.
Yeah. Because that's a whole different. It's definitely a whole different problem. It's not really proofing, right? Because there's with dogs that have behavior issues, there's a level of fear and anxiety. What we're talking about for proofing is really for like training a dog that just needs basic learning, training different behaviors. Um, and that's that the dog is able to handle being taken to different environments and things like that, and that can handle those things, right? So, and it sounds like your little girl is having
Mm-hmm.
some issues with people and whatnot. So, yeah, might be a little more than we can do in this in this segment.
The other thing I kind of wanted to bring up about the proofing behaviors is sometimes we use equipment, right?
Mhm.
And then how to pull that away, I think is a good point because sometimes, and you have to realize, are you using that? What are you using that piece of equipment for? Is it to help with understanding? Is it to secure behavior because you're looking for a specific position, such as a square sit, for example? What is it you're utilizing the equipment for? And then you have to work on testing it. And then after you test it and the dog understands fluency, then you can start to look at proofing, right?
Mhm.
So common things I see are management tools such as, not that I'm against harnesses, but I think sometimes we become, or even prong collar, anything, it doesn't matter, right?
It doesn't matter.
They become a tool of management and then an accepted way of life. And that's fine if that's how you want to deal with it. But it depends on what your goals are. I mean, I'm always about trying to get the behaviors with very limited tools to a point where it's fluent enough and then repetitive enough so that the dog can repeat and do those behaviors without having to constantly reinforce or what have you. So I think you have to ask yourself, again, it goes back to fluency. And does my dog truly understand it in various environments?
Mhm.
Especially if you're using tools, right? I mean, part of it is you have to segue away from tools,
Right.
whatever those are. Even if it's a treat, like today, there was another dog who was like, if you have the cookies, I'm totally with you. So we took the treat pouch and put it off to the side. Okay, do the behavior over there, mark it, then come get the cookie, right? That kind of stuff.
Right.
And I think, those are considerations.
Right. Well, just like I used the freedom harness to teach my dogs not to pull when they were young. And it depends on, it's very dog dependent. Cha-Cha, my other shepherd, didn't need anything. She was great. So she didn't need any kind of equipment. My shepherd and my lab, my 5, they needed it. They needed the harness. And so we had to work on getting them off the harness. And how did I do that? When they were better about not pulling, I had the harness on, but the leash was on the collar. And were they able to handle it then? And did they not pull me? And then once they got really good about not pulling me in that situation, then the harness came off, and then we tried that. And every so often we had to take, if we were going to be in a busy environment, I would have to put the harness back on to get through until they were a little older. Actually, my lab was the one that took the longest. She was a little more challenging. But my puppy at the moment seems to be pretty great about not pulling. So far I haven't had to use anything. He's still just on a regular buckle collar. He's doing really well. So I'm like, okay. So we'll see where he goes. My Jive and Tango at Jive was pulling me at 5-6 months old. He's not really doing that. So again, you have to go take it dog by dog, right? And what that situation. Yeah, he's not really showing me. That doesn't mean he's not gonna. But at the moment, he's been really good about not doing that.
So Joanne, I'm curious because like with Roscoe, right, and his people sensitivities, like do you use equipment to help with him, help that with him? Are you using anything to help him with that or no?
No, he he doesn't like to pull to get to people really. I mean, so he's pretty good on a leash, and I'm not going to take credit for that. I mean, I had a little bit of it, but he was good when I got him into foster care as a youngster. So I I'm not knocking anybody, but I seriously doubt that was training related. I think he just is a dog who doesn't pull on the leash, right? So no, although I will say right now I do have to use some verbals, because when we go into familiar spaces, he's like, "Hey, do you have those cookies that we always play that game with?" And it's like, no, we're not walking up to people. You wait. But no, for him, it's more about just using verbals. But he is also a much lower energy dog. He's not super persistent. He's, unless it's a squeaky toy, but he's, that's who he is.
Right.
That's who he is, right? Now, I mean, I'm going to tell you, with Bam, it's the only dog in my lifetime. I can't. I've tried. That dog he'll be 5 years old next month. I cannot leash train that dog. He has skills. We have worked on it for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
He'll never be off a harness. I cannot. His persistence is too much, right? Yeah. Unless I have food in his face, which even then, if he's not hungry or he doesn't want it, he's like, I'm going, right? And
yeah,
I personally don't. I mean, this is the first time, like I said, ever seen in training, ever had in my life. I don't think that's so much training related as it is persistence. And he sucks as a dog in that realm, right? He's awful. I mean, he was so hard to train when he wants to do something. It's really hard. So yeah, I mean, management and verbals and food and all of those things, I've tried to fade. I can't get there with that dog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, Jive took the longest for me. She was almost 2 by the time we finally got her to stop dragging me all over. And it was hard. She would lower her center of gravity and to wherever she wanted to go. I came this close, actually. She's the only dog in a long time that I thought about putting a pinch collar on, because she was so bad. But finally, I think she must have known I thought about it, because she when I was getting ready to make that decision, she goes, "Nah, okay, well, I'll stop pulling." And she's usually pretty good. It's an interesting, just interesting how that works. But like I said, and Joanna said, some dogs just don't pull. Like my little puppy, he's right now, knock on wood, he's been great. But I also am not crazy thinking that he's just going to be,
perfect until
that, he's just never going to pull. No, he's probably going to be, maybe when he gets an adolescent. No, come here. He's probably going to be we'll see when and if it happens and how long it lasts. Maybe it'll be easier to train. I don't know. It's hard to know. Cha-Cha I never needed anything. She was so easy in that regard. Didn't take me long. She just understood it, and she's like, okay, that's what you want. All right, that's what we'll do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
which is nice. But these two were not quite as easy, for sure. And going back to that, some dogs that have a lot of persistence, it's going to take a little while to undo, especially those of you who rescue, to undo some of those behaviors, right? You're gonna work a lot harder if they have, especially if they're very persistent. Because one of the wonderful things about them is that they have persistence, right? And if they're persisting on something you want, it's great. But if they're persistent on something they want that you don't want, it's not so great. So it's one of those things to consider.
Yeah, and I think too, like a lot of times, I talk about from the rescue standpoint is people bringing the dogs in and wanting to make their lives whole and never having any rules. Well, you're already setting the tone of the relationship, right? Or lack thereof. So starting off right and setting some structure and saying expectations and some criteria is going to be critical. So you have to think about in your head what I want the end result to look like, and then how do I get there? And like Nancy had said before, splitting is super critical, and it's baby steps. Did you notice the dog's head turn? Why did the head turn? Was it because of this? What was it because of that? And then how do I adjust and help the dog be more successful? Maybe do I increase my reinforcement? Do I adjust by moving further away from that stimulus? What have you? But I think a lot of times it's about thinking it through. And I mean, it's hard. I mean, I'll tell you, like, after a day of teaching, and you guys know this, I'm exhausted. I'm tired because you're constantly monitoring the room. You're constantly trying to say, okay, what's happening here? What's happening here? And it's very difficult to do it. And when you do it for so long, it's just becomes second nature. Not that, we all have things to work on, but, and I miss stuff. I always do because I'm not, I don't have eyes everywhere all over my head. But those are things that I think that we as trainers also forget, and we don't give enough credit to our students at times because it's difficult. Like we do it so natural, right? Boom, 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 got it. And I think for the average person who's just has this one dog in front of them, and how do I address that is a whole nother story. So I think breaking it down and explaining the whys of why we're doing what we're doing and how to continue to get there is critical, because that's the only way people learn, right? And it's hard to learn in the moment. It is, because you've got this going on and that going on, again, unless you condition yourself to it, which is, we work with dogs, but I can't imagine working with kids. My head would explode. I'm like, okay, you be quiet because I can't concentrate on what's happening over here. It's like you're driving and you're like, wait, I need directions. Let me turn on the radio. You know what I mean? And I do that. I'm like, I need quiet to concentrate. So, if you imagine like trying to learn new concepts for clients and stuff, right? It's difficult. It's difficult. So I think it's really important to break it down why.
Yeah. And it is, because it is difficult to try to, and you need to put yourself, I know as dog trainers, it's really challenging for us to be patient, but we have to remember we were there once too.
Oh, yeah.
And we have to be able to explain how to, help them. And if they didn't get it the way we explained it one time, we might have to figure out another way to explain it. This is where I think dog training is science and an art. It's a combination of the two things, because this is where you need to have those skills to be able to figure out, okay, they didn't get it this way. Let's see if we can get it this way, right, for the people.
Yeah, that's one of those, to me, things you want to look for in a dog trainer. It's like, I always call it cookie cutter dog training, right? If this is exactly how we teach sit and this is how you have to do it no matter what, it's like toolbox isn't very big, right? There's 101 ways to get a dog to do something. Just because it doesn't do it the way you do it doesn't mean there's not a different way. So as long as you get the same outcome.
Right. Because it's true, right? It's like, and it's because, and many of those trainers really truly don't know another way to teach it.
Sure.
So if your dog doesn't happen to fall in that category and be that kind of dog, then it's just not gonna, you know what I mean? It's not gonna work. So you have to be able to figure out, okay, if this doesn't work, try this. Right. And I'm gonna use it as an example. I started working out. I go to this place, and I've, at my age, it's hard to find a place where you have, all these 20-year-olds and trying to keep up with that, because I'm never going to do that. So I found a place that they have all these exercises, and the good, and this is why I like it. There's certain exercises I can't do yet, and maybe never, right? But at the moment, I'm physically not able to do that. So they said, okay, do this instead. So you work the same body part, but you work it a different way. And these trainers are able to come up with that like right away. It's like, okay, you can't do that, then try this, and this will work the same body part. That's how you know, right, that they know what they're doing, versus a trainer that's like, oh, I don't know what else you can do. Just do this. You know what I mean? Because I've gone to those too. They couldn't tell me how to change it and how to make it easier so that so I can be successful where I am at in my journey with that. So it's the same as with dog trainers, right? It's like, okay, I can't do this, or my dog's having trouble with this, then what else can I do? Right? What else can you do to help them get it or understand it, or help the dog understand it? Because that's the other thing too, depending on what you'd have in a dog. So yeah, it's an interesting, and I thought, I was thinking about that today as I'm like, yeah, it's like, okay, I can't do this because I'm not able to. How can I do it? And they were able to just, oh, okay, then, like, without even thinking, they're like, do this instead. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, that was so helpful, because then I felt successful, even though I couldn't do the exact exercise. I was able to do a part of it that was suited for my physical ability in that moment in time. So
right.
because that was I was thinking to myself, I know I can't do that. So
Can't do the splits. How do I,
that's not gonna happen. So what else can I
you know?
but and for some dogs, if you have a person trying to manage food and a dog that's out of control and da 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 da, yeah, you might have to adjust it a little bit so they can be successful.
Right.
So they may not do it the same way as the other people, but you can get them where they can be successful in that situation at that time with that dog in that moment. And then once they get a little bit of success, builds their confidence and they're able to do a little bit more. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I was thinking about that. I'm like, yeah, because you could see it. You're like, yeah, that's not gonna
You know
happen.
what, though? I think the common, and this kind of is a little off topic, but I think the commonality is the experience level, quite honestly.
Mhm.
I really do, because, you live and learn and you learn different things. Well, let's try this, let's try that. So even though there's the latest and greatest out there, it's like, it's not just one thing. It's a combination, and you try stuff and you're like, this might work. I mean, for example, like getting a dog to go down. Like if dogs have a hard time with the down, hello. The next thing I would try to do, like I'm working with my Papillon to try to get him to go down. And so I do the little leg bridge, right? And I pull him through and then feed him for maintaining the down. And he's in a down position. So I'm feeding. Then I lift my leg up over him to see if he can maintain it. He pops up. I pull the cookie away. Then I start working duration and stuff like that. So, but that's typical. Like I've seen dogs who have a hard time with it. And then, try the bridge. And then sometimes people want to squish them. And I'm like, don't do that. Don't smash them to the ground, right? You're like, gentle. But like having multiple ways of handling things, I think is critical. Like Joanne said, multiple tools in the toolbox. But I do think a lot of that comes with, like everything in life, age and experience, I don't think you can come out knowing everything.
Well, shot collar. Emmy, that's a pretty sensitive topic. So here's my short and dirty answer. The only time I think a shock collar is appropriate is if it's a life and death. And I'll give you 2 examples of that. One of it is if you live out in a farm and your dog is chasing cars. If that's happening where your dog's going to die, if you've tried everything else, then you're going to have to do that. And the other is snake training. If you live out there's a few people I know that live out in the area where there's a lot of poisonous snakes. And again, if they get hit by a snake, they would die. They use electronic collars for that.
Yeah.
Those are the only 2 kind of situations I think are going to that I think is appropriate. Using a shock collar to get behaviors is really not necessary. We have dogs that have been trained all the way through using different methodologies. That's not a shock collar, because that is not actually a relationship you want. It's basically, here's what it comes down to. It's like, okay, every time I want you to do something, I'm going to smack you to do it. And if you don't, or if I'm going to ask you to do something, and if you don't do it, or if you don't think if I don't think it's what I want, that is a relationship based on a lot of fear. And that is not really, that is not really how I want to live with my dog. I want my dogs to be afraid of me. Unfortunately, I've seen more bad shock collar training. I know there's good shock collar, good training, good people who do it, but most of it is pretty bad. And I've been on the other end. Somebody took a dog to train to a, boarding and training, and the dog ended up having such an adversive reaction to people from being shocked by the trainer that we had to euthanize the dog because the dog was then unsafe. And it didn't start out that way. The dog wasn't born that way. It was created, and it was so sad. And for jumping up, I'm going to tell you, I got 2 labs that love jumping up. So for jumping up, like counter surfing or jumping up on me, I just ask them to sit or get a toy. That I have been most successful with the getting a toy thing. That's been very helpful. So when my lab, I get, especially my female, I get my lab. She's like so excited. I'm like, oh, where's your toy? She goes and gets it, so then she can't jump up on me. I have been most successful with that. With 2 of my labs is what I've had to use that for. And that seems to be a lot more fun than shocking her, because then you're also creating that association of being shocked and you getting home or jumping, you know what I mean? It's like, it just creates a lot of negative situations. So again, there are instances where I would say, yep, you're going to use it. Again, life and death, right? I don't know about you guys.
No, I think you covered it.
Mm-hmm.
So Amy has a question. How do you work on proofing while try to no longer using lure with food or changing from the harness or prong or something to a choke or buckle? If it doesn't work, do you go back to the harness or treats more briefly and then try to take away again? So it sounds like you're working on leash training there, Amy. Yeah, I mean, at first, like what I recommend to people is you can have your original thing on and then have a regular collar on or a regular whatever the thing you want to move to is, right? And as you come in, maybe the dog's all jacked up, right? And you come in with the normal thing. As they settle and you start getting attention and, you know, you start working together, flip it to the regular collar. We'll just say that, right? Flip it to the buckle collar. And, you know, if that works really well, reinforcement's high, great, right? If they really struggle, somebody's other dog in class barks or lunges or does some of that and they lose it for a minute, put it back. And then you keep trading until you can eventually have, you know, the original one. But the other thing, you know, in conjunction with that, yeah, in your living room or in your backyard or somewhere where there is no distractions, you should start to work on the thing that you want to really be on, to say the regular collar.
Yeah. And then with the food, so Amy, when you're changing, right? So when you're going from, like when I went from the harness to the collar where they both were on, I still reinforced much. And I think Lisa mentioned that a little earlier before we went on, where you start to delay the delivery of the reinforcement. So you're not getting rid of it completely initially, but you are starting to delay the reinforcement of that particular, you know, you're starting to delay the reinforcement, right, Lisa? Is that what you're?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
you want to delay that reinforcement, make sure the dog gets it.
Right. I think the pause is critical, right? Especially when you're starting to decide how much more I need to add to my criteria and gradually increase that. So I think that it is just something that we don't pay attention to. We want to go from treats to no treats, and that's really not fair. It's like jumping from first grade to fifth, right? There's a lot in between that we've missed. So,
yeah, I think delaying the reinforcement, especially when you make that change, you can pay and just slow it down as you go on. So eventually the pauses between the reinforcements are pretty big, right? Emmy asked about using a harness is better than a buckle for smaller dogs. I think it's a personal preference, to be honest. I don't use harnesses except for scent work. My dogs are on martingales all the time, or, you know, when we're out and about. That's what I prefer. And then I use harnesses for, you know, or whatever equipment needed for whatever sport they're working on. So, but I don't know. Some people, I think it's a preference, right?
With my small dogs, like with Riff, because he's so small, I do worry about the tracheal collapse for the smaller dogs. So I guess it depends on how hard the dog pulls. I have him on a harness now just because he does pull when he's interested in wanting to talk to people, talk to dogs. He's like, must talk to them. So I already know that there's going to be a problem. And to be honest, the one time I put a collar on, he got it stuck in his mouth. And I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do that because he was screaming. And I tried to tighten it up, but somehow he still did it. So the joys of small dogs. And I forgot about that because, you know, I started with smaller dogs first, but so it kind of reminded me of some of the trials and tribulations, those of us who have small dogs and large dogs. You know, there's such a difference that way.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, I think that's what you find preferable, right? Right. You know, I think.
Yep. Just please don't use your small dog harness like a shopping bag.
Yeah.
So I just pick them up like this with the tub. I'm like, stop it. Anyway.
Yeah,
Personal preference. Sorry.
it is. It's personal because I use martingales. Um, and I said I use harnesses, but I use them for whatever sport they're like nose work. We use harnesses for that. But for regular life, I just use a martingale. But also my dogs don't pull a lot because I don't want that because my big dogs are big and I can fall down. So I try not to. And then when they do, now I can at least if they like the shepherd, the only time he really pulls now is to go pee on something. So so now it's like, no, you're just gonna wait with me, and we walk to the bush, and then I give him the command to pee, because because otherwise he was actually that got away from me, and see even knowing that, but he was starting to pull pretty hard to get to a, and I was like, wait, what? And then I was like, wait a minute, I'm the dog trainer here. You will walk by me until we get to that bush, and then you can go pee. So now it's gotten a lot better because I was like, for a minute, I let that slack a little bit. You see how what happens there? I let it slack a little, and he goes, "Oh yeah, I'm just gonna drag her to the bush because I want to pee on it." It's like, no, because he's really good about not dragging me to people and not dragging me to other dogs. So he's gotten better with that. But yeah, dragging me to a tree to put pee on it, he's like, he'll do that all day long, and I'm like, no,
Mhm.
we're not doing that. So. And so we're working on, and there's no shame in going back and working on it because I am now going back and working on a little bit more of that because he's gotten bigger and and every once in a while he'll lose his mind and just, I'm gonna go over there. It's like, no, no, you're not. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. I just wanted to, because one of the things you definitely want to do is proof behaviors, especially the basic ones, right? The stays, the loose leash walking, all those things that make for a happy, healthy pet, right? And that anywhere you can take them anywhere and they still understand what you're asking them. So
Yeah, I always liked Suzanne's description of that. She always called it what, green eggs and ham training.
yes, that's
Can
right.
you can you do it in a box? Can you do it with a fox? Can you do it, like those types of rhyming things? Can you do it in your yard? Can you do it in your driveway? Can you do it in the car? Can you do it in the training class? Like,
Right. Don't assume that because they can do it in the driveway, they can do it in the,
right.
you know, in the parade. Because I think that's what happens. We go from our driveway to the parade right away, and it's like,
Yeah.
and then the dogs are not successful, and then we're surprised that that's a problem. So anyway, Dr. Simon will be with us next week. Hopefully she'll be feeling a lot better. And then we're going to talk about, she's going to go over the basics of blood work. And this is just to help you communicate better with your veterinarians, right? And understand what the blood work means and being able to ask really good questions on what, on that stuff, just to make you a better, um, uh, advocate for your dog when it comes to their health. So hopefully Therese should be feeling better and she'll be with us next week. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a great rest of your night.
Thanks,
night.
everybody.